Unmasking India, an expose on racism, corruption, and the illusion of progress. India, often hailed as the world's largest democracy and a land of diversity, presents a facade that beguiles many. Behind this veneer lies a complex reality marked by deep-seated issues such as systemic racism, pervasive corruption, and a culture of scamming that has tainted its reputation both domestically and internationally. This blog aims to peel back the layers of this complex tapestry to reveal the uncomfortable truths about India's societal challenges. While India prides itself on its diversity, the reality is that racial and ethnic discrimination is a significant issue. The caste system, which categorizes individuals based on their social status, is a form of institutionalized discrimination that has existed for centuries. Despite constitutional provisions against caste-based discrimination, practices of untouchability and social ostracization persist, particularly against Dalits and marginalized communities. Moreover, the rise of Hindu nationalism has exacerbated racial tensions. The rhetoric surrounding the so-called otherness of Muslims and other minority groups has led to increased polarization and violence. Lynching incidents, mob justice, and hate crimes against minorities have surged, painting a grim picture of societal intolerance. This racial animosity is often downplayed or dismissed by those in power, contributing to a culture of impunity. Corruption in India is not merely a byproduct of individual greed. It is a systemic issue that permeates every level of governance. The Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index consistently ranks India poorly, highlighting the extent of the problem. Bribery, nepotism, and bureaucratic red tape obstruct progress and undermine public trust in institutions. Political parties, often funded by dubious sources, engage in corrupt practices that prioritize personal gain over public welfare. The infamous 2G spectrum scam and the Commonwealth Games scandal are just a few examples of how corruption has siphoned off billions from the public exchequer. The lack of accountability for such crimes only reinforces the notion that corruption is an accepted norm in Indian politics. India's reputation as a hub for scams and fraudulent practices cannot be ignored. From Ponzi schemes to cyber fraud, the country has become notorious for its vast array of scams that prey on the vulnerable. The proliferation of online scams, particularly against NRIs, has tarnished India's image globally. Furthermore, the informal economy, which employs a significant portion of the workforce, is rife with exploitation and deceit. Laborers often fall victim to unscrupulous middlemen who promise jobs and fair wages but deliver nothing but despair. This scamming culture is not just limited to individuals, it extends to businesses that engage in unethical practices to gain competitive advantages. India is often portrayed as a rising economic powerhouse, but this narrative glosses over the stark inequalities that persist. The wealth generated by economic growth is concentrated in the hands of a few, leaving millions in poverty. The urban-rural divide continues to widen, with rural areas lacking basic infrastructure, healthcare, and education. The government's focus on Make in India and other initiatives is frequently criticized for favoring big corporations while neglecting small businesses and the informal sector. The promises of job creation and economic development often ring hollow when faced with the reality of underemployment and unemployment. The Indian government's approach to dissent has raised alarms among human rights advocates globally. Laws like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act are used to stifle free speech and dissent, often targeting activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens who dare to challenge the status quo. The crackdown on protests, such as those against the Citizenship Amendment Act and the farmers' protests, highlights the government's intolerance for dissent. Furthermore, reports of human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings and arbitrary detentions, have drawn international condemnation. The treatment of minority communities, particularly Muslims and Dalits, raises serious questions about the state's commitment to human rights and equality. India's rapid industrialization has come at a significant environmental cost. Air and water pollution levels are among the highest in the world, leading to severe health consequences for millions. The government's focus on economic growth often overshadows the urgent need for environmental protection and sustainable development. The neglect of indigenous rights in the face of industrial projects has led to widespread displacement and loss of livelihoods for marginalized communities. Activists fighting for environmental justice are often met with hostility and violence, reflecting the broader disregard for human rights in the name of development.